Great. So, hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this first webinar organized by the newly established Work Time Reduction Research Network. I'm Agnieszka Piasna, Senior Researcher at ETY, and I will moderate today's meeting. We will have the presentation from two speakers, Juliet Shore and Wen Fan, and that will be followed by Q&A session or an open discussion with the audience. Juliet and Wen will share with us some of the evidence from the global trials of the 4-day week, and their talk is entitled, Do 4-day week employee well-being improvements affect company outcomes? But before handing over to Juliet and Wen, I would like to give floor to Brendan Birchall, professor at the University of Cambridge, who has played a key role in setting up this research network and who is also currently chairing the steering committee, so a group of 8 or 9 academics. He will say a few introductory words, so let me just hand over to you, Brendan.
Thank you. Yeah, welcome from me and welcome from the steering group, from the 8 of us. You can see who we all are on the website. Welcome to this webinar, the first in a series, but I think more importantly, welcome to the launch of this new research network. Everyone here will know how much interest has been in 4-day week and working time reduction research in the past months and couple of years. And clearly there are lots of organizations already involved in that. But one thing there hadn't been was a network specifically for academic researchers and other researchers to bring us together in what we do. And that's what we've been doing. And I think I see today as the end of phase 1 of building that network. We've got the webinar series started. We've got the website there, and I assume that everybody listening to this today or who's going to be listening to the recording will have been to the website. So you'll know from the website who we are, what we're interested in, how we define working time reduction. And as many of you will know as well, we're organising a mini conference that's coming up in June in Ireland, Limerick in Ireland. And we were overwhelmed. We had a really good response to the call for that. We've got over 20 papers, high quality academic papers specifically on working time reduction that will be running through that conference. So having built the network to this point, the next phase is going to be very much about involving all those people who signed up, the scores of people who signed up as members. And we'll think then how we take the network forward to facilitate further high quality research in working time reduction, to encourage projects, small projects, large projects, to encourage the communication and results between us, discussions, and everything you'd expect from a community of experts around this topic. And so in the next few weeks, after we've had another meeting of the steering committee, we'll be emailing the membership and start then to think about how we take things forward together. So do make sure you're in that next phase. And if there's anyone here who hasn't already signed up for membership, it's very simple, take 5 minutes on the website. Then please do that immediately after this seminar today or immediately after you've seen the recording. Thank you. Back to you, Aga.
Thanks very much for this introduction, Brendan. So indeed, please go to the website, sign up, because that allows us to remain in contact with you. Then we can email you with forthcoming activities, initiatives, ask you for input, ideas, and create this really lively and interactive forum to exchange on working time reduction research. So let's move to the presentation by Julie and Wen. And just as a formality, a few words of introduction for those who don't know them yet. Juliet Shore is an economist and professor of sociology at Boston College. Her research focuses on work, consumption, and climate change. She has long-standing interest in working time, and since 2021, she has been a lead researcher for 4-day week global's work time reduction trials. Wen Fan is an associate professor in the Department of Sociology, also at Boston College. Her research interests include work and family, health and well-being, life course, social change, and quantitative methods. She's currently working, among other projects, on data that examines the worker, organizational, and societal impacts of 4-day workweek trials. So without further ado, I hand over to Julie and Twen to share their slides and ideas. Over to you.
Okay, can you all see the slides?
They are loading, but we see your screen. So just give it a second. It just says loading.
Yeah, okay, let me see.
While they're loading, I just...
Oh yeah, we see them. We see them.
You see it, but it's not in presentation mode, right? It's...
No, we see all the bar as well.
Okay, because if I just... So maybe just use this mode, because if I use...
Try it from view, see if it works from view.
From what? From view.
From
okay.
view. It's the top
Slide.
one. Okay.
Does it work?
It's
No.
loading.
Yeah, it says that it's paused. I don't know why. Okay, can we just do...
We do see
like
it. We see it very well. So
okay,
fine.
yeah, let's just use this way. Yeah, sorry for this technical issue. I don't know why. But thank you all for coming to this very first webinar of the Work Time Reduction Research Network. We are very excited to be here, and you know, it's good to see those old friends and some new faces and new names. So before I start, just wanted to say that this is a collaborative work with Julie and also Guoning, who is a fantastic research assistant for this project. She's also in the audience. And I also see Alex from the audience who has provided tremendous help for our data collection and data analysis and so on. So I just want to acknowledge all of them first. So the title of this presentation is about organizational success with the 4-day-week evidence from global trials. So as you all see, it's still very much a work in progress. So we would really appreciate any suggestions or comments you might have. So in this particular talk, I'm going to just let you know a little bit about our research questions and then the general setting of this study, in particular the trials we have been, you know, the trial data we have been collecting from organizations and employees. And then we'll talk about, so I will be talking about the findings from the quantitative part of this research. And then Julie will tell you a little bit about the interviews she has done with senior managers, CEOs, and the trial leads regarding the actual implementation and the success of the trial. So the focal question we aim to address in this study is what predicts organizational success with the 4-day work week. So obviously success can be assessed along many dimensions and at different levels. But for this particular study, we are adopting a straightforward definition of success. And that is whether companies continue implementing the 4-day work week after a 6 months on trial. So, and a key predictor we are examining is improvements in workers' well-being. So we believe this question, this link between improvements in worker well-being and the success of the trial is critically important and has much to contribute to the literature on workplace interventions, organizational change, and the future of work in general. And it also carries great practical and policy implications when we begin to think about how to sustain the momentum of work time reduction movements. So let's just get back to the research question itself. So on one hand, it seems obvious that organizations should have incentives or they should be motivated to maintain the new arrangement if this 4-day work week arrangement improves employee well-being, right? And indeed, that's precisely the reason why many organizations or companies participated in the trial in the first place, because they have seen this pervasive overwork and overload problem in current work culture. So addressing that problem has led many organizations to this trial to begin with. But on the other hand, the link between the two improvements in worker well-being and continuation or continuing on doing 40 work week is not that clear cut. So we know based on previous studies in sociology, in organizational studies, that there have been some high-profile interventions with documented success in terms of employee well-being, but ultimately those trials or those initiatives were ended by leadership for various reasons. So for example, in this slide, you see this book, Overload. So in this book, Aaron Kelly and Phyllis Moon, they describe this Fortune 500 firm, an IT firm in the United States. So they have this intervention that provides greater control, provides employees with greater control over their schedules and supervisor support. And tons of research papers have been published based on this project, showing that there is very clear evidence that this intervention works, that it improves workers' well-being. But ultimately, the leadership decided to discontinue the trial after a merger. Similarly, in this second book here on challenging operations, they found that efforts to reduce work hours for surgery residents faced tremendous resistance. Inside in the hospital, especially from senior members. So taken as a whole, the link between improvements in workers' well-being and the continuation of organizational change might not be as straightforward as it might appear. So which really presents a very intriguing question for us. So let me just tell you a little bit how we are going to study this. As many of you know that, since around like 2022, we have been collecting data from companies and employees who participated in 40-week trials. So on 40-week trials, these trials were organized and have been organized by this global NGO 40-week Global. They have been established because because they have found that 40-week is very successful in not only helping employees to benefit on employees' well-being, but also to benefit organizations as a whole in terms of their productivity, revenue, and so on. So this organization 40-week Global was established on trying to advocate globally of this 40-week model. So the first trials began in 2022. So the trial itself lasts around 6 months. But before the trial begins, there would be this 2 months preparation period in which organizations and companies, participating organizations and companies, they would go through a set of, for example, workshops, training sessions to receive mentoring, peer mentoring, and also mentoring from leaders and experts in the field in order to really go through this work reorganization process to prepare for the upcoming changes in their work hour reductions. So there are 2 requirements generally for participating in the trial. First is that there has to be a meaningful reduction in work hours. So it's not a compressed work week that we just work 4 days, but 10 hours a day. So that's not really that. There has to be some genuine reduction in hours. And another is that the pay has to be maintained at 100%, so no reductions in pay. And hence the name 180-100 model. So as I mentioned, the first trial started in February 2022. It includes mostly organizations in Ireland, but also for US companies. And since then, we have been collecting data wave by wave. As you can see, up to this point, we have 9 cohorts. So if you follow the news, you might see some news coverage about the upcoming German trials that will begin next month, March 2024. But you can see that the countries are very diverse. We have Ireland, US, Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, South Africa, and Germany. And so for this, for the analysis or results, I'm going to present you. We are mostly going to focus on the first 7 cohorts where we have complete data because they have completed the trial as of now. So let me just tell you a little bit about what happened to these employees who have participated in the trials in terms of their actual changes in hours and their changes in well-being. So this shows you from baseline to endpoint the distribution of work hours. So so you can see there is a very major or clear shift in the distribution of hours. So the mode of working hours reduced from 40 at baseline, so this bar, to about 32 hours at endpoint. And in general, there is this shift towards the left end of the distribution, suggesting that the intervention or the trial really worked in the sense that it reduced workers' hours putting on the job. So, and corresponding to this significant reduction in work hours, we see a very clear trend of improvements in their subjective well-being. So here we show you these 5 often used indicators of well-being: burnout, job satisfaction, mental, physical health, and positive emotions. So all of these changes are statistically significant, as you can see from this column, and in expected directions. So their burnout reduced by 0.4 points. So 70% of the employees say that there is their burnout reduced. And job satisfaction improved. 50% experienced an increase in job satisfaction. Mental and physical health and positive emotions all improved. So this is really, I think, consistent with what previous studies show, that there is clear link between reductions in hours and improvements in well-being. And what is more, given that we have a wide range of heterogeneity in terms of how work hours has actually changed between the beginning and the endpoint of the trial, we have looked at whether a greater reduction in hours would lead to greater gains in well-being. And we found that this is indeed the case. So this is based on some model estimates, and we control for an extensive set of covariates in these models that are not shown here. But the general finding is very clear, as you can see. The larger the reduction in hours, so this 8 or more reduction group, they experienced the greatest decrease in burnout and the largest increase in job satisfaction, positive affect, and mental and physical health. So then the question leads, so now I think up to this point, we have established the fact that the trial works in the sense that it reduced the workers' working hours. And it also leads to a noticeable improvements in their subjective well-being. Then the question becomes, does it have anything to do with the company's decision as to whether to continue or discontinue with the trial? And that's the key question we try to address. But before looking at that question, let me just show you on average how many have continued and how many decided to discontinue on the trial. So at the end of the trial, so 6 months at the end of this 6 months trial, we asked companies what they are going to do. And so the great majority, 85%, say that they are going to continue implementing 40-work week, this model. And only about 6% say that they are not going to keep doing this. And we haven't received the responses for about 19 companies. So that's the companies that we are not able to include in our analysis. So we asked them the same question at 12 months, so 6 months after the end of the trial. And 3 additional companies decided to discontinue. But still, the great majority are still doing a 40 work week, even 12 months, and sometimes 18 months after the trial. And here it shows you the just disaggregate the data by industry. And you can see some really wide range in terms of the rate of discontinuation. On one hand, we have some very low rate, like civil, social, and other services, professional services. IT is also relatively low, about 5–6%. But at the same time, we have seen some relatively higher rate of discontinuation by construction and manufacturing companies, and this other category. And if we look at this other category in more details, it seems that the retail companies are really the outlier. They have very high discontinuation rate. So this is just to give you some general sense about, if we define success as whether companies are going to do it after the trial ends, then it seems to be a very positive picture, because most would continue, even though there has been some differences across industries. And here we are doing some cross tabulation analysis to compare between continuing and discontinuing companies in terms of their changes in employee well-being, in working hours, working intensity, workability, and work smart. So all of these variables we are looking at here are changes. So from the beginning to the end of the trial, what happens to the employees in that company. And most, if not all of these findings are not really significant, as you can see from here, which is expected given that we have a relatively small sample. So I think it's more important to just look at the trend of these findings. And you can see some clear trend that on average, continuing companies, they are more likely to see greater improvements in workers' well-being. So their burnout has a greater reduction. Their job satisfaction improved, whereas job satisfaction for the discontinuing companies really declined. So their work hour reduction is longer, is more, and work intensity increased just slightly, much less than the discontinuing companies. Workability also improved to a greater extent. Even though work smart. So this is a set of, I think, 5 or 4 item scale, which essentially tries to capture how efficient workers do their jobs, whether they are trying to use, for example, more innovative ways to improve their productivity and efficiency. But unfortunately, we were not able to ask questions on work smart for earlier cohorts, companies in the earlier cohorts. So unlike the other measures, working smart is only captured at the endpoint. So if we're using the endpoint as a indicator, then it seems that discontinuing companies actually have high levels of work smart, which is a little unexpected. But here, let's just move on to the key finding based on logistic regression models. So what we are predicting here is the log odds of companies discontinuing with the trial. So in other words, positive coefficients mean that these predictors are associated with greater odds or greater likelihood of discontinuing with the trial. Whereas negative coefficients show that these predictors are associated with lower probability or likelihood of discontinuing with the trial. So in addition to the variables that we are presenting here, we also control for industry, size of the company, and whether the entire company is doing the trial. So we are having these 2 models. They are almost identical to each other, with the only difference that one model is about changes in burnout and the other is about changes in employees' job satisfaction. So we do not include them in the same model just because they are highly correlated. So to avoid the multicollinearity problem. But I think the general pattern or the take-home message is very clear in that if a company experiences greater improvements in workers' well-being, they are more likely to continue with the trial, right? So, or in other words, using our definition of success, they are more likely to have a successful trial. So, for example, companies who have seen greater increases in their employee burnout are more likely to discontinue with the trial. Whereas some companies who see a greater improvement in their employees' job satisfaction are less likely to discontinue with the trial. So regardless on the direction is the same, that if their employees are happy, if their employees are really satisfied, then the companies are less likely to just discontinue with the trial. We have also looked at some other predictors or covariates, and some of these are a little surprising. So, for example, we saw that maybe a company does not experience a greater reduction in work hours that might lead to their decision to not continue with the trial, but that doesn't seem to be the case. So working hours, changes in work hours or changes in work intensity do not seem to matter at all for companies' final decision making. And it might be because that to the extent that changes or reductions in work hours or work intensity matter, they might operate via improvements in well-being. So to the extent that we have controlled for improvements in worker well-being, these two factors might not be that significant. So workability also does not matter. So workability is often used in the literature to capture workers' self-perceived productivity, right? So how good do they think they are? How good they consider themselves to be a good worker or something like that. But surprisingly, it doesn't work that. It doesn't really matter that much in companies' decision making. So perhaps that when organizations making decision whether to continue or discontinue with the trial, they are not really thinking about workers' self-perceived productivity. They might be more relying on objective metrics such as revenue or other types of productivity metrics, such that this particular one doesn't matter. So in future analysis, we are going to include some more objective or those often collected by companies, those metrics, to see whether they matter. But that's for some future analysis. So the final one, working smart, this one is a little surprising, in the sense that if we look at model 1, it seems to suggest that companies who have high levels of smart working practices, they are more likely to discontinue with the trial. But this finding is not stable, because you can see that it's significant in one model, but not in another. And as I mentioned before, unlike the other measures, we only have the endpoint of this measure for all the companies. So there might be some measurement error that has led to this unexpected finding, which we could talk more about in the Q&A. So okay, so now I'm going to just turn over to Julie, who is going to present us with some findings from the interview data.
Great. Thank you so much, Wen. We're pretty excited about these new findings. And I did also want to echo Wen's point at the beginning about how nice it is to see old friends, some very old friends, new friends, and just to thank the whole steering group for pulling this together. And it's really great to see this research community coalescing. So I've been doing interviews with CEOs, founders, sometimes senior managers, sometimes heads of HR or trial leads, and a few employees as well, to understand what they did, what worked, what didn't work, to kind of get under the hood, because the data that we've been able to collect from companies has been much, much less detailed than what we've got from employees. So we have a lot of data from employees. The companies have been spottier in what they've given us, and also we have very, this is a small and medium size enterprises sample for the most part. So we don't have a lot of common metrics. I mean, some of them have almost no metrics. So, but these interviews I've done are from 13 organizations. They're from this range of industries. And these have been open-ended conversations focusing on how they implemented the 4-day week and what accounted for stress or success or failure. So next slide, please. The first point I want to make is about what I'm calling what we're calling the classic model, which is the 100-80-100 model. You can see the trademark there. 4-Day Week Global has trademarked that. It is key to the way the founders understand how to implement this schedule. And the work reorganization process that they are given, webinars, coaching, et cetera, help on during that 2-month onboarding, gives them a lot of detail and information about how to improve the productivity of time in the workplace and eliminate low value activity, focus on high value activity, become more intentional and creative. And of course, Alex is here, Alex Pang from 4-Day Week Global, who conducts many of these webinars, and he can tell us more about them. But key things that came out of the interviews, and that I understand from going to some of those webinars, of course, meetings and sort of dysfunctional meeting culture, we could call it that. Meetings that are too long, have too many people, too many meetings, etc., are a key thing that most companies address, giving people more focused time. For some of these businesses where we're talking about in manufacturing, for example, or even in some kinds of software, accounting, and so forth, what we might think of as process engineering, which is they look at their workflow and eliminate bottlenecks or eliminate inefficient dimensions of their workflow. And then one other thing that came out of the interviews, which is a sort of ongoing tweaking process in which things might be working fine, but with one problem. One architecture firm, for example, had an issue that when they finished up some designs on the end of Thursday, the project managers were very unhappy about having to wait till Monday to make changes because they would typically be working over the weekend. So a number of firms have tweaked to give a little bit more on-call availability for workers on that off day. For the most part, the firms that I've talked to who do that don't have to call on people very often, but it's just that ability that they could do that in the same way that pre-trial, they might be able to do that on a weekend. So why does it work? According to these people and my analysis of what they're saying, there is that kind of Parkinson's law at work, which is that the introduction of a lot of new technology in many of these firms, I would say particularly I heard about this in those professional services firms, did not lead to shorter work hours. And, we can talk about why that is, but there is a norm of not reducing work hours. So as you get more productive through technology, and a lot of these firms have put in, quite a bit of technology over the last couple of decades that makes people more efficient, they haven't reduced hours, and they haven't necessarily laid people off either. So you get that work expanding to fill the time. I've mentioned the other thing, dysfunctional meetings culture. Some of them also talk about office chatter. And Alex is really expert on this, enhanced creativity. So that freeing up that time, giving people more rest, giving them the ability to kind of have time where they are not just doing something has improved creativity. And some of the firms talk about this. Next slide, please. So one of the questions we could ask about the 180-100 model, and it's something we were very concerned about from the beginning, is this just a speed up? And this, there's been a kind of left-wing critique of the model occasional on these grounds. Employers have been speeding up workers for centuries, and yeah, you can get a speed up and have people do 5 days work in 4. They may prefer it to five days, but it's a less it's a less compelling claim than we can reorganize work, make people more efficient without just speeding them up. And so we have a number of variables that we've asked about this, smart working or speed up. And what you can see, it's we can get into this in the Q&A. There's a little bit of interesting differences in what we're finding with what we have, what's called this within subjects methodology, which is the same subject, same person, baseline to endpoint. But then we also have asked them some retrospective questions. So at the end of the trial, we ask, did your pace of work go up? Did your workload go up? So these are baseline to endpoint. These are not the retrospective. And what we see is almost no increase in pace of work, workload, a little bit in work intensity. But you can see, you've got still a third of the sample saying, declining. Little bit more showing an increase. So it's clearly not a big speed up in most cases. The big thing that, and Wen has mentioned this, where we really see a big jump baseline to endpoint is in their self-rated productivity or their current work ability, which is current ability at work compared to lifetime best. So people are feeling a lot more effective, efficient, competent, etc. Well, got to take that back because there's some strange things in the data. I think we have a competence question that isn't very highly correlated with these two. So I'm not going to call these competence. But on these measures, people are expressing, they get a big jump up in that. So that's what the classic model, the 180-100 model, is saying is should happen. And we do indeed see that. And we see that increase in work smart. It's for a smaller group because we just put in the baseline more recently. Okay, next slide, please. So it turns out that there is another group of work. Not all these companies follow the 180-100 model. There's another group that I call the 180, or we call the 180-80s. And these are organizations that already have high intensity of work. They are experiencing high levels of burnout among their staff, resignations, poor quality of life for people. The ones that are most obvious here are restaurants. We have very few, but healthcare and NGOs. So these are staff who just need a break, and reorganizing their work to sort of have them do as much work in 4 days as they did in 5 is not something that these companies are interested in doing. Fortunately, it's not what these employees need. They need something different. These companies eliminate a day of work basically with no increase in workload. There's a little bit of an exception for the nurses study. I can tell you something about that. They typically you're not seeing an increase in work intensity. You're seeing things like in some of the NGOs, they're just doing less. And we have some big NGOs now that are shifting to this model, and they're just, if people can get a little bit more efficient, maybe a little less office chatter and so forth, but they're not necessarily expected to do as much in 4 days as they did in 5. This is just a way that these companies or these organizations are trying to help their struggling workforces. The restaurant case was very interesting because they reassigned tasks. They promoted some people to take, they gave a day off to their head chefs and managers, salaried managers. And so they promoted some people to take some of the work that head chefs would normally do. They hired a few more people, but typically at a lower level than the people who were getting the 4-day week. So one of the other things that happens in some of these 180s is that they do hire some new staff. And why does this work? They get very big well-being improvements. One of the ones I love is the restaurants, because these people are working long hours. They started with a 55-hour work week, so they're not going from 40 to 32. But what's interesting about their well-being findings is they, unlike most of the other companies, they show a big increase in relationship satisfaction. So these are people who are, working so hard, their relationships are really suffering. So that was an interesting one. But very big well-being improvements here, big reductions in resignations. In some of these cases, they're telling me nobody's quit since we started this. They get a bigger, better applicant pool. And a really interesting thing that I've found, not necessarily from this 180/80s, although to some extent, you are seeing that to some extent, but companies that are starting to monetize team stability in their contracts. So in these professional services, they can write into the contracts that they get bonuses if nobody leaves the team. In one of the industries, we have a lot of people in marketing and advertising. They have 30 to 40% turnover in some of those industries. Next slide, please. So the lessons from the interview data, the first thing is what we call the paradox of work intensity. So the first group of companies are, in a way, you can think of them as low intensity companies because they have enough slack and dysfunctional meeting culture and so forth, so that they can reorganize work and get as much done in 4 days as in 5. But the high intensity organizations also are benefiting from the 4-day week because of the impacts on employee health and really importantly, retention. And, I'd be curious what Alex thinks about this, but our sense of companies through the couple of years now, we have, two full years, is that we're seeing more companies come to these trials for issues around retention. And of course, we had in the United States, we had the Great Resignation during this period. We have lots of unfilled positions, and that's also happening in other parts of the world. Among the organizations that we've been interviewing, there are clearly some hybrid cases. Kickstarter, which is a tech company in the US, is a good example of this. They did a little bit of 180/80 stuff. So they did a little bit of new hiring, adding people, but they did a lot of 180/100 work. But they are a hybrid, and I think there's probably more, maybe many organizations that are hybrid. Key point here, and this speaks to what a lot of the economists are focusing on and what the press is focusing on, and what we hear a lot about in the discourse around this is productivity. The 180/100 model, of course, really focuses heavily on productivity. But if you think about what will make a trial successful for companies, productivity is only one metric there. It's also resignations, it's the applicant pool, it's the healthcare costs, there are a whole variety of costs and benefits, things that firms face that go into profitability, which matters, or viability for the nonprofits. And of course, we have quite a bit of nonprofit representation in the sample. So it's important not to fetishize productivity. The other interesting thing is the extent to which the quality of the work improves. And that we're hearing a lot from the 180 companies, and also, from the 180 hundreds too. The team stability is really key. But in the restaurant case, for example, improved quality was, a big part of why they didn't care about the fact that they had to spend some extra money for this. Finally, productivity is really hard to measure in a lot of these organizations that are part of these trials. They're white collar, they're knowledge work. And there's a way in which we think that because, it's really tough to get a handle on that, continuation is a really good metric for figuring out whether this works. So last slide, let me just, on behalf of both of us, thank you. And we look forward to this conversation.
Okay, thank you. Fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing all the results with us. So we will have about 15-20 minutes for the discussion, but if there are many questions, we will not cut you. So I will collect the questions in whatever mode you prefer. I encourage you to put your cameras on if you feel comfortable doing this. Perhaps switch to the gallery view so we have more of the feeling of being together in a meeting. And you can also put the question in the chat if that's what you prefer. Yeah, so just to kind of fill in the space before people put the question in their head. I mean, the results are fascinating, they are encouraging, and I wonder, when is it time to just let this develop on its own? When will companies actually take their initiative and do not rely on trials or academics doing the advocacy or the NGOs doing the advocacy for this, no? But when it starts rolling on its own. We had the situation in Belgium, and I think there is a person from University of Ghent listening. There was a legal possibility to engage in, to shift to shorter working weeks, but it was not taken up just on its own. There still seems to be a need for a push coming from different actors. So just a point of reflection, when will it just roll on its own?
Well, I mean, if I can just jump in on that, there's an extent to which that is happening. So there are lots of companies that are just adopting 4-day weeks, and we end up occasionally hearing about them. Sometimes they'll write to us, or you just, I met an executive director of an organization the other day, who just said, oh yeah, our union asked for it and we've been on one for a year or something. So I think it is happening. Of course, whenever you have a government intervention or an advocacy one like 4-Day Week Global and the other groups that are working on this, it can spread the word and so forth. But I feel like there's momentum. The European countries, some of the continental countries, it's a little bit more complicated, I think, because they already have been on a path of work time reduction. So, we're seeing a lot in some of the Anglophone countries, which is where, a lot of the early activity has been with these trials, have long working hours.
Yeah, so I think there is definitely some regional variation. So I'm from China, and when I think about like East Asian context in particular, it's almost impossible to think about 4-day work week, given that most of the workers are struggling with like 70 hour a week. So that's, yeah, definitely one thing. But I do feel that, like Julie said, we have seen many organizations are begin to take the initiative to do this. Even though there is definitely a role for the government to play, I think, providing more benefits or incentives for organizations who would want to do it, or at least try it. And then once they see the benefits, what really happening in their company, then they will have the, just some incentives to keep going.
Thank you. There is also a question. Oh, there are now two. There's a question about discontinuation in the chat. So is the change of senior leadership an issue, or change of ownership of the business? And
Yeah,
Julie, to
sorry.
reflect, yeah.
I can answer. So one of the bigger companies in our trials in that first trial was taken over by private equity. They had a fantastic trial, great results. They were promoting them and they were all in on it. And then private equity firm took them over and just boom, it's over. We saw that with one very big company in the UK trial. In fact, we were really excited about them because we were going to get controls because they weren't doing it with the whole company. It was like a 1,000-person company or so, and we were going to get matched units that were 4-day versus non-4-day, and then they got a new CEO, and boom, it just over. So,
Yeah.
it does happen. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. Do you have more to say?
No, I was just saying with the overload book that you showed.
Right.
That's what happened there, which is they had a merger, and the new people squashed it.
Right. So that's actually because when I was preparing for the talk, that got me think that we really need a variable organizational change or some, leadership change. Unfortunately, I don't think we have the capacity to collect such data for each company in the data set. But I do feel that many times the continuation or discontinuation is not just what actually happens to employees, but some external factors at the higher up level that's very difficult to predict. So I think that's definitely a great question.
There's one where that counter case, which is Kickstarter, because they got a new CEO after their trial had been going for a while, and the people at the firm convinced the CEO to keep it, and then he got named one of the top 100 companies. He was very happy about that. He got a lot of that credit because of the 4-day week. So.
We have a follow-up question to this, actually, coming from Yvette from FNV, so the trade unions in the Netherlands. What is then the role of unions in this? Would you see them as a crucial push factor, at least in some contexts, perhaps more European labor markets?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there've been very little union involvement in the trials, the 4-day week global trials, but we're starting to see a lot more union interest. Of course, in Germany, you have unions starting, IG Metall, which Beth knows well, putting this in for steelworker contract in the US. And my understanding is it came from rank and file. UAW putting it into their bargaining demands. They didn't get it, but we're also hearing about NGO unions that are starting to ask for this. So I think the union phase is starting to ramp up. And one thing is, if you look historically at the shift to a 5-day week in the United States, you had the same basic sequencing, which is it started with heads of companies. In the US, it was the Sabbatarian movement. It was Jewish owners in textiles who wanted Saturdays off. And then, of course, you had Henry Ford. And the unions were, the conservative AFL was opposed to the 5-day week originally. They eventually come around and then, come in big to support it. And now, of course, they take credit for the 5-day week.
There's another question in the chat, so I'll just read it out. What about the links between 4-day week, telework, and green environmental concerns? So avoiding commuting. I guess that depends on the model, obviously.
Take it. When?
Yeah, so we are actually just applying for a grant, trying to assess, more comprehensively the environmental impacts of 40 work weeks. We have collected some environmental measures from employees and at the organization level. It's just that it has so much data cleaning work to do, including how to adjust for example, seasonality to fully assess that impacts. But I mean, environment is not really my field, so I guess Julie, you are probably more, suited for answer that question.
Yeah. So on the telework, I mean, that's one specialty. We have about 20% of the companies are fully remote. The biggest group are hybrid. We do see some small commuting reduction, and also commuting by car, reductions in commuting by car. But it's not huge impacts, I think because of the shift to remote work. It's really, really complicated to figure out exactly what happens to energy use, even if you just start with that. And then you also have issues of diet, you have travel rebound. I mean, we've been collecting data on the energy use and the travel rebound. We don't see much of a travel rebound. People tend to spend that off day, pretty close to home, which is interesting. We were worried about Europeans and 3-day short flights, 3-day weekend flights. That doesn't seem to be happening. But yeah, this is something we are trying to get more team capacity to really dig into more.
Thank you. So that was the question from Isabella Bileta. Now we have another one from Nick Marks about team stability that you addressed before. So it's actually an interesting angle. I think this is typically very undervalued. So what benefits did the businesses identify? The one that gave a bonus for this, for instance.
So two big things. I mean, one is when you have high turnover, like the 30 and 40% turnover, you have a lot of time spent onboarding and training people. So it's really inefficient. And what they found, the person I interviewed talked a lot about one particular big, it was digital advertising company. One big client who the team was just much better. So they had a big increase in quality because they had stability. Everybody knew the business, so they got more done. And also they were able to be more creative and innovative because people really knew the business and you didn't have so many new people coming in. So you save time, you get a better quality. Yeah, those are the main things. I think there's one other thing I was thinking of that you get with the stability. Yeah, I can't remember it now. I'll put it in the chat, Nick, if I think of it.
What was the size of the bonus? Nick wants to know. Do you have this information?
Like either 100,000, 250. One of the things this person told me, she ended up not being able to do this, but her plan was to bid lower on a contract and then to get the contract and then put the bonus in. So because she felt confident, nobody was leaving on her team at all. She felt confident that she'd be able to meet the bonus and then she'd get the higher value for the contract and, she'd have a higher chance of winning the business. But yeah.
Thanks. I see the question from Brandon now. Shall I just read them out or people don't? I mean, you're also free to just take the floor. So Brandon asks about what goes on inside firms that decide to discontinue the trial.
Yeah, just to add to that, do we have a sort of ethnography of, say, during that 6-month period when it becomes clear to senior managers and when it becomes clear to the whole organization that it's not going to go ahead and that maybe people's initial enthusiasm is going to be, people are going to be disappointed. And I wonder if some of that then feeds back into those figures on the burnout and the job satisfaction. And those are great figures you got, and really some valuable data there. But yeah, I wonder, do we know how in those small number of firms that where they discontinue, how that information leaks out when decisions are made and what reactions there are to the decision?
If I may just follow up and add one angle to this question from Brandon, did you see any gender differences either in the reaction of workers or in the companies in terms of the composition of the workforce for the outcomes, for the different outcomes? Yeah.
You mean the gender differences?
Gender, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, we haven't. So let me just answer this question first and get back to Brandon's question. So we haven't looked at, for example, the gender composition of the company as a predictor, but that seems to be a very interesting way to look at the whole process. I think one issue is that we have many small firms, so the gender composition is just very unstable. If you have, for example, just 7, 8 people in the company, then it's just will get lead to some data issues. But definitely we could look at that. So the unit of analysis is organization. So we cannot really look at, for example, individual gender as a predictor or something. So so that is this. And for the discontinuation decision, we did ask them, when you actually stopped the trial, and can you tell us a little bit more as to why? So, but it's up to the company as to how much information they are willing to reveal to us. And it's hard for us to really verify that information because sometimes they might not be the actual decision maker. They are just a contact we have. So they might not really know the true story behind the scenes. But just based on the qualitative responses we are able to get, it's not very consistent in terms of, if there is this main pattern. It's mostly, I think, sometimes I need to go back to the data myself. And Gordon, perhaps you can, tell us a little more if you remember the details. But based on my recollection, it's mostly like there is some disorganization, or they lost many people over the trial period, so we really can't do it. And some other reasons. So yeah, that's my impression. But Julie or Gordon, if you have more to add, you can.
Yeah. So, because there's such a small number, I think what we're hearing from them is pretty varied. So like a retail shop that only has 4 employees that was closing for one day, and then they just realized they need to be open for that 5th day, or another team where half the team went on maternity leave and it's like a 5-person team, and so they paused the trial. It just there, but I think we have Julie Yen's research on a software company that tried this and it failed, and she was there the whole time. And the answer to that was, it was controversial within the management team to begin with. So there were people who were against it, and they set, I think, an unreasonable criteria for continuing, which is they had to have not just employee well-being, but also increased productivity. And they got no change in productivity, which was, many companies would be happy with that 100-80-100 model. Well, that's what it's aiming for pretty much, or at least satisfied with. And so those people just asserted themselves, and they were sabotaging it from the beginning. And and then Phyllis and Youngman's study of a company they call BuildWork just weren't meeting their deadlines. I think some of those UK companies where they took certain divisions out of the trial in the middle, it was because they had a set of metrics that weren't being met. And I think, that there are a bunch that are, bunch of these companies are very metrics oriented. And I think that, if we had to pick one thing that probably was the most common, although, we're talking such small numbers, I suspect that it's failure to meet preset metrics.
There's a comment on this topic from Joe O'Connor in the chat that the reasons he observed was that the venture capital or private equity pressure was the factor that led to the termination of the trial.
Yeah, but that Simpro was the first one, right? And then another one that I don't know who you're referring to, but yeah, I think I mentioned it before you came on, Simpro. Yeah.
There is another question. Do you data on how staff retention improvements?
Yeah, we did. So we asked employees their turnover intentions. So how likely are you going to leave the company in the next 3 months or something like that? So we do see a significant reduction in that regard on average. So we also collect data on the company level in terms of their the size of the how many employees they have, but also on the turnover rates. And we see some, so that data needs more, I guess, data cleaning, but just the preliminary analysis does suggest some reduction in turnover rates.
Thank you.
Alex may want to weigh in on this too. I don't know. Maybe.
Perhaps not. Alex? All right.
He's on a
It's on mute.
Sorry, Alex.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so I mean, if there are other questions, just please raise your hand, or otherwise we can close this discussion because there will be more chances to meet, I hope, in this group. This is just the first of the seminars we plan to have. And as Brandon mentioned, there is also a conference upcoming in SASE conference in Limerick. So we hope we'll have more chances to see you, exchange with you, and also learn about research of others for the week or working time reduction more generally. So I think with this, I will thank the speakers. I will thank also Brandon and the rest of the steering committee and you for coming here and participating in this meeting. And I hope to see you soon again. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.